red blue, red blue, baby, red blue. Every kind of people got every kind of blues, but a red man got red blues, red blue, red blue.
So it is, by some accounts, the new year. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, and no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with a look back at our glorious and our great history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation and simulcast on the Gwe, CKWE in Tandanega. You can find us at www.ltnradionet.com. I am John Kane. I'm your show's host and producer, and I'm joined in studio by Matt Hill.
What's going on?
And I've got Jake Proud in studio, who's trying to run our board, although it seems like we're having a lot of technical difficulty today. So I apologize for any sound quality and video quality on our Facebook live stream. We're having some internet problems. We got a bunch of things going on all at once. I don't know if
I think it was an EMP.
I think they're out to get me. Maybe I don't even know. Well, anyway, I know I've got a little bit of sound in my headphones, so I know that it isn't. Things aren't exactly right here, but we are on streaming live online, and again at www.ltnradionet.com, and we are Facebook live streaming. We're actually using my smaller Wi-Fi device because my HughesNet is not working right now, so I'm not sure what's up with that. So I'm hoping we have enough to fumble through, because I think we've got a pretty good show lined up today. Obviously, it is January 1st by the calendar we all use, and we can get into a debate on when the new year really starts. I'll tell you when my new year starts, and I mentioned it on a Facebook post if you didn't see it. Look, my birthday was December 20th, so you know what? That's when my new year started, because if we're going to count years, that's where my years start and stop, I guess. The planet.
Right, let's go 9 months before that, then.
Well, it depends on it depends on where you're on the right to life issue, I guess. Yeah. Of course, the planet, the winter solstice is a couple of days after my birthday. It's usually December 21st, 22nd, somewhere in there. And we know, and frankly, Native people have known for a long time that that is when the Earth starts its cycle from the farthest from the sun, tipping us back towards the sun. And of course, we base at least midwinters. We could argue about some of the other stories, but we base midwinters on so many days past the winter solstice. I've heard some say it's after so many days after the first full moon, or so many days after the first new moon. Either way, it's so many days after really after the winter solstice. So regardless, we are into a new year, at least by calendar. I know because I saw the ball drop last night. But you know what? With this, obviously, every year we continue to do this show. There are issues that we have to revisit from time to time, and that's why we talk about things like identity so often. We try to get back into a conversation about culture, about some of the language ceremonies, but we also talk about the social issues and how much of this is still coming at us all the time.
It's all tied together, I would say.
Yeah, and it is all tied together, but it affects us in different ways. Even as when we have a discussion about our battles with New York State, we can't have that conversation if we don't have a sense of our identity. We can't even argue about sovereignty and about the rights that we claim as Native people, birthright, if you will. If we're so conflicted about that we don't know the difference between a birthright and some sort of granting of a right by the Americans or Europeans or anybody else.
Promised in a treaty.
Yeah, promised in a treaty. Every time I hear somebody suggest that, use the word treaty rights, that expression all by itself frustrates me because, even in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, they try to make more of a reference that these are rights that exist and that they're not to be infringed upon. It's kind of what the Bill of Rights for the U.S. Bill of Rights is supposed to do as well. But even in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, they say things like treaty-protected rights. So what they're really talking about are when there is a specific issue, right, privilege, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, that Native people have always had, but it's reaffirmed in a treaty. So what they're saying is not a treaty granted right, but a treaty affirmed right, or a treaty acknowledged right. So I can accept that a little easier than some of the other issues, I guess. So I don't know. But one of the things that I want to do, look, I do this opening every week, and I talk about the fact that we don't do buffalo speeches here, or that we're not going to offer lessons about spiritual guidance. I'm not a big one on prayer. And look, I appreciate, all of the well wishes on a birthday or on an anniversary, or I got a lot of Happy New Year's, and I offer people the same sentiment back. I hope this next year is a good year for everybody. I've got my jaded views about, what this next year is going to be filled of in a second year 2 of Trump and all that. And when people offer me their prayers and their blessings for the new year, look, I appreciate your intent, but I'm not sure what a blessing even is, really. People can say, oh, of course, everybody says, bless you when you sneeze. God bless you when you sneeze. And no, I don't know really what a blessing is supposed to be, and who has the power to to administer these things. And I'm not trying to be just sarcastic, but so I try to do this show to be logical. Yeah, we do laugh and we can use sarcasm and and parody and a lot of those things. That's parody, not parity, just so you know. We try to do all that, but I also,
there's a reason we do that stuff, though.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be a shaman here. I'm not the holy man on the radio. There are guys like that on the radio, Native guys. There's all kinds of evangelicals. There are all kinds of people you can listen to for spiritual guidance. I'm just trying to say shake the cobwebs out a little bit, but it gets to my point about what I want to talk about with today's show. I know what my message is, and I know what the message that we try to convey in this with the show. But even Matt, you and I don't necessarily agree on delivery.
Not on delivery, no.
Because I am a little bit more abrasive than you are, and I'm probably quite a bit more abrasive than you are. And part of it isn't even so much what I say, but the fact that I'm saying it. And I know there are people out there, who, the whole anti-warrior thing, and some of the folks that think, I'm not Seneca, I'm on Seneca territory. So there are people out there who just reject me as a messenger beyond the message,
regardless of what you're saying.
But I'm quick. I'll call bullshit. It's what I do. And that may not be the most diplomatic way to address somebody else's belief systems. So I understand that. I recently posted a meme that I posted. Actually, it's from Bono. A meme that I've recycled a few times over the years, and it says something: the more you believe, the less you know, or the less you know, the more you believe. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. Of course, it works either way. So the less you know, the more you believe. So in other words, if you lack knowledge about anything, then you have to rely on a certain amount of belief and that things just are going to happen a certain way without understanding the things you can do to affect it. Climate change is an example. If you believe that you can just trash the earth and it's not going to have any effect on you, it's not going to adversely affect your asthma or your cancer or
If
anything.
you believe that it was made in 7 days, I will just make another one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, or that this life doesn't matter because it's all about the afterlife. If you believe all that stuff, then you get to, I don't know, you don't have to be responsible, for, I guess there are other things in a lot of these belief systems that try to teach and assert and affirm responsibility, but there are a lot. I mean, I'll get back to one of the issues that a point of contention, and I know this is going to offend people, so I'm going to try to say it nice. But there are those who believe that at birth, it has been determined by some great mystic power that we only have so many days to live. That it's determined or predetermined, maybe perhaps even before our birth, that the quote unquote God, creator, Jesus, whoever, Allah, that he is giving us, of course, it is he. And so all those people say, well, we don't really put gender to God. Yeah, you do. So, I mean, creator is with O-R, not E-R. And that's because it's been genderized. So if you have this belief system that says, although we don't know when that last day is, but that last day is predetermined, then what difference does it make if we raise our sugar level? What difference does it make if we jog at night in black jogging clothes? I mean, what difference does it make if we drive 110 miles an hour rather than 55 miles an hour? What difference does it make what we clog our arteries with? What whether we shoot up heroin 3 or 4 times a day? What difference does it make if it's already been predetermined at our birth or before our birth or back sometime in time immemorial, that when we were graced with the privilege of living, that we were only going to do it for the number of days that was predetermined by a higher power? Look, I reject that notion. And I got to tell you, I think I mentioned on the show, a friend of mine posted that. A guy that I've known for a number of years, Ray Cook, he used to be the editor for Indian Country Today. And we've clashed over the years on various things, but he posted this after Irv Paulus's funeral. And I said, the problem with thinking that way? And I raised just that issue. Then it doesn't matter whether you drink or not. It doesn't matter if you do. It doesn't matter if you commit suicide. Because apparently if you believe that, you are going to die that day anyway. And I'm sorry. There's just no way.
Explain that. What you were talking about before, that we used up our days.
Well, because they're in the funeral.
But the difference between granted that many days or used up your days.
Yeah, I mean, in the funeral ceremony, in the language now, and when people say things are lost in translation, it's really lost in understanding even the translation. So there is an expression that says, such and such, our dearly departed has used all their days. Now, somebody along the line has interpreted that expression, which is a very old expression, as meaning we had a predetermined number of days and we used them up. Look, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow and died, then yeah, that was my last day. But if I don't go to the street tomorrow and I don't get hit by a bus, that doesn't mean that something else, like, a thunderbolt was going to crack me down, that somehow I was going to die that day. I mean, so it's just unreasonable when people have misinterpreted this expression that says such and such has used up all their days as saying those days were predetermined. Because I'll tell you, it doesn't give me any comfort if I'm the loved one of a suicide victim or a murder victim. I mean, think about it. What you're saying in this thing is that, it's really unfortunate your loved one got murdered, but God already determined that this was the day
it was going to happen.
Yeah. And it's the same kind of thing that people say, well, we lost our loved one, but it's because God wanted them. Look, and I know that saying this, and this is a sensitive subject. And so I'm bringing it up as an example, although I really mean what I'm saying. I'm bringing it up as an example of tackling these issues that some people can be offended by because they've already built a belief system. So by misinterpreting that expression, somebody has used up all their days, others have embellished that to mean that God, the creator, Sequoia, Disu, whoever, has at birth granted us only so many days to live, and that on that day of our death, we were going to die that day no matter what. And I know that's not what some of these guys who are doing these funerals, for instance, and when they do the translation, when they do misinterpret that, I know they don't mean to say to anybody sitting in a crowd, yeah, well, your loved one was going to die today no matter what. So the fact that they had to suffer 3 years with cancer, or that they were raped and murdered, or that they commit suicide because of depression and all this other stuff, or that they overdosed because, they bought a bad batch of heroin, or an accident happened to them. I mean, so again, part of what I want to talk about in the show today is the fact that while I think it's really necessary to confront some of these things, I know that I don't sugarcoat them very well, and I don't tread real lightly on it. I provide probably tough talk on tough issues, and I don't disagree with Matt, with your sentiment that, boy, it'd be great if you could say that a different way sometimes. And Matt, he doesn't scold me. It's not that's kind of not the way it goes. But he offers constructive criticism. Both the things that I post online, sometimes, or the things I say on the radio. And I think, and part of the reason and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Matt, but I think part of the issue is if I confront one of these topics, for instance, and somebody agrees with me, but they know that I've already turned somebody off. It might, like for you, if you got to have a conversation with somebody who's already seen something that I posted or heard something I said, it's like, man, you're making the hole a little bit deeper for me to dig out of. So I don't know if that's part of it, but
my concern is having people just totally shut you off for, just based on like a too harsh of a statement or whatever, because these kind of things require a discussion. And if if you knock them out of the park right away with the cold hard facts in a rough demeanor, that's not going to leave them much with to come back and counter discuss it.
Well, and I agree with you to a point, obviously,
mm-hmm.
and of course, part of the whole thing is always pushing back about what's the scorpion and the frog, when he stings, and they said, why'd you do that? Oh, it's my nature. Well, it's my nature to be. It's my whole point with the soul. If you don't know that story, it's a story
I've
of
heard it, but I'm not too keen on it.
Okay, the story is about a frog who a scorpion says to a frog, "Will you give me a ride across this river?" And it could be a turtle too. And they said, "Well, no, I'm not going to do that. If I get close to you, you're going to sting me." He goes, "No, I want to get to the other side of
similar.
Yeah, and I want to get to the other side. And if I sting you, then I'll drown. I'm not a swimmer. You're a swimmer." And so the scorpion reasons with this frog or turtle, and convinces him. So halfway across the creek, sure enough, the scorpion stings the frog, and that's the way I heard the story first. And as the frog is starting to seize up and gonna die, the frog asks the scorpion, why would you do this? And the scorpion says, "It's my nature." So almost to suggest that I can't help myself. So I guess it's my roundabout way of saying I can't help my sarcasm. Look, it is my nature to confront, I guess, things that seem to me, and maybe it's because I've reasoned these things out in such a way that they seem absurd, that our people or any people can cling to some of these beliefs. And they're not even belief systems. Sometimes they're just random thoughts or beliefs that people have incorporated. And I don't mean just a practice that they do based on somebody else's belief, like giving somebody a Christmas present. I mean, that's another layer of that. But to believe, I mean, if you're 58 years old and you're still putting milk and cookies out for Santa Claus, I'm sorry, it's time to stop. So. Which brings me to another place. I mean, one of the things that you and I kicked around before last week's show or last Friday show was, I'm wondering if comedy isn't a place. And I'm not trying to make light of some of this stuff, but I think about some of the things that we confront in history, for instance. I said in the intro to the show the truth hurts. I mean, there are some ugly, ugly truths, and I am, I interact with people all the time on radio and with the things that I write and public appearances, and I do have people. Again, the most common thing that I hear from somebody is, "I can't believe I didn't know that. I can't believe I'm, 57 years old. I'm 65 years old. I'm 73 years old, and I've never heard that before." Mankato, Minnesota, for instance, the Dakota 38, Lincoln signing the execution order. The details of the Sand Creek Massacre, the details of Wounded Knee. L. Frank Baum writing these genocide editorials. People who have these visions and these images of those faces carved in a Mount Rushmore, realizing that every one of them have played a role in crimes against humanity, in the genocide, not just of Native people, oftentimes crimes against people of color in general. I mean, right up to the last one there, Teddy Roosevelt. So as so that feedback that I get that says that to me, I realize that if these are the people who heard it and then backed up, and did some research on their own to say, wow, it's hard to believe that when I first heard that guy say that stuff, I thought he was a jackass. And now I feel like the jackass for not knowing and hearing it at this stage of my life for the first time.
So essentially, what the big major conflict is you're generating cognitive dissonance, in a sense.
Well, what I'm doing is I'm bringing it to the surface because obviously people are already in that place where there's tension, where they are experiencing tension. Because let's face it, when I talk about,
I don't think so. I think it's already okay. If a person has those thoughts or beliefs and their normal way of doing things their whole life, you're bringing it to the surface.
Well, it depends on who you're talking about. Because if you're talking about white people, for instance, and again, I'm not trying to make this a race thing, but if you're talking about Americans, the average American who has been lied to their whole life, you're right. They aren't necessarily experiencing the same kind of cognitive dissonance that a Native person who has some background, knows enough about that history to know that our relationship with the United States and its predecessors creates a strange relationship that we have even today. But understanding but the difference is here, even the people who've been lied to, they still battle with certain issues. It may not be the same kind of cognitive dissonance, but think about it. If you don't understand why it is that black people, why they don't like white people, if that's your observation, if you don't understand the racial tensions that go back because you have bought into this notion that slavery was bad, but then we fixed it and everything's good now, and black people were freed, and then the civil rights gave them more freedom. So now they just so if you have this attitude, or if you have this attitude about Native people to say, Native people were treated badly, but we did teach them religion, and they benefited from us sharing that civilization. If you bought into all of that stuff, you still are going to struggle with not understanding the tensions that are going to, that you're going to confront through your whole life. Not understanding why somebody might look at you a little cross-eyed when you say, or sideways, I guess, when you say something that's inappropriate. Why it is inappropriate. You'll never understand why we think it's wrong to have the emblem on the side of a Washington football helmet.
Well, one of the things that made me talk about what we were talking about after the show last week is when you're talking about stuff, you're explaining something that totally calls out what a person's belief system is. Not the core belief of what they're talking about, but
the foundation.
Yeah, how it is that what they're talking about doesn't make sense. And I think that's what you're good at doing is you rationalize stuff to say, well, how can that even be true? How can that make sense? And but they're stuck looking at it like, yeah, you're right, but that's the first slap in the face that they get. So I guess that's what we got to talk about is how do we deliver that message so that you can, have the conversation to say, well, why do you think like that? And, and so much of their world is based on that stuff.
And I try to start with a place, especially when I'm dealing with non-Native people, is to at least start from the place. Look, you don't have to understand everything the way I understand it, or you don't have to share in my perspective. What I'm trying to put out there is that my perspective exists. Mm-hmm. So I think the first step is to say, they look at things a little differently than us because of their history and which side of historical conflicts they've been on. So at least if I can begin there, but even still, even with all of that, there are a number of people who are just going to completely reject truth,
a lot of those,
and facts out of hand. But it's not just non-native people, and that's my point. And I think to more of your point, I think you're less concerned, or at least I guess I am, but maybe perhaps you're less concerned about the tension that I create for a non-native person understanding these straightening out some of this truth than how I handle our own people, because those are the people I'm trying to bring back. That exactly. You and I both want to bring these people around. I understand that they're people that we have lost generations. We have lost generations. We lost generations to residential schools. We lost them to church. We've lost them to military. And I don't mean just people who've died. I mean, we've lost their ability to gain enough of their, or to retain, I guess, enough of their native identity to apply a native view on how we go forward. And an example of this is, I mean, let's look back to 1848. 1848 is when the Seneca Nation adopted, through whatever means, however they did it, because I've heard people said, it was all about 30 people jammed that through, adopted a written constitution, and did away with what they were calling the chief system. And you and I have had this discussion, the difference between a clan system and a chief system. But at that point, in 1848, and this isn't just unique to the Seneca Nation either. I mean, many native territories were going through such a state of flux and such an inundation of assimilation policies and indoctrination, through all kinds of different ways, that the solution to a governing system that had moved so far away from the Guyana de Goa, so far away from the clan system, the system of of resolving conflicts and addressing issues, that they adopted a very Americanized, with the help of Quakers, a church, a rather strict denomination of the church, I might add, to come up with essentially the current Constitution of Seneca Nation. Now, I'm not condemning the Constitution per se, but the point that I'm making is, rather than fixing their deviation from the path in 1848, they threw the baby out with the bathwater. And it was, and in fact, when they did it, women couldn't even vote in the first Seneca elections.
Not even till 1965.
Not till 1960. So a system that revered women, that had women in positions of power, authority, governance.
Checks.
I mean, checks and balances. I mean, a system that, and I'm not going to say equal in the sense that the woman's role and a man's role were identical, but they had equal value, and they shared in the responsibility of how, not just how a family, but how a community, how a nation would run. But we had already moved so far away from that this male dominance that was impressed upon our people so much that we, a constitution that would allow only men to vote would be adopted and would hang in there for 60, 70 years. I mean, no, I'm sorry, 100 years, over 100 years. I mean, that absurdity jumps out at me immediately when somebody says, well, we had to go to a constitution because the chiefs were corrupt. Okay, but kind of fixing the corruption might have been easier, but that's not there was a lot of other pressures going on. So when I point some of this stuff out, I know there are people who, can take that the wrong way. And I guess that's part of the conversation that I want to talk not just about the message, because I think much of the message, decolonization, the role of activism, and the role of rejecting assimilation, all that stuff is something that I think we have to work hard towards. The question is, can we do it? Should we sugarcoat it? Should we soft pedal it? Should we, put some humor in there, or do like I do, which kind of like take it almost like a hammer to it, or should we do it all? Look, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we'll take a break here and we'll come back. But I think that's part of what I want to still have the conversation about. So we'll chew it up a little bit when we come back. This is John Kane with Matt Hill and Jake Proud, and we'll be back right after this.
Now you say you're sorry. It's not what you say, it's what you do. Tell us you'll do better, but it's hard to believe in you. The day has finally come, told the world that you were wrong. Far too many have passed on now. When it's sorry, took away our children, stole our mother's love, laid waste to our traditions. Wasn't that enough? Separated from our culture so many years, so alone, with no mothers and no fathers, in a world so far from forced to use another language, punished well. You spoke your native tongue, tried to kill our spirit here, but our hearts still beat as one. Took away our children, stole our mother's love, laid waste to our tradition. Wasn't that enough?
All right, thanks for coming back. And of course, that's Murray Porter. And I love playing Murray Porter on the show. I mean, there's so much of his music that confronts the issues that we do face. And again, I gotta say, he's got a different way of delivering the message, and it's much smoother than the way that I deliver it. But unfortunately, as much as music and blues in particular gives you a chance to get an emotional connection to the issue, it doesn't provide you with enough of the facts to understand why it's not just something that we should feel while music is playing. Hey, look, before I get back into it, let me go ahead and thank my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, good friends like Ed Schindler and Cynthia Trice, Neville Spring, Sugar Montour, and the Seneca Nation I want to thank for contributing to the program. I also want to thank many others who've helped the program over the years. You guys have helped me to educate, entertain, and inform for the last 7 years. We're well into our 8th year, and we couldn't have done it without you. I want to thank you all for joining in the fight and doing your part. I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. And I also want to thank CKWE for both the simulcast and the rebroadcasts, as well as Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, Indigenous Resistance Radio, all of you for carrying Let's Talk Native on their networks, as well as any of you others who carry the network. And of course, all of you who share the show, including my wife, who is pretty diligent about sharing the live stream, the Facebook live stream on many of the group pages. And of course, I also try to share our SoundCloud audio, our YouTube videos. And if you go to Let's Talk Native TV, that is our YouTube video channel. That's where you can also find the video and audio of the shows, as well as other audios. And as we get into 2018, I'm hoping we're going to do a lot more of the videos that we started to do for a while, and we're going to try to bang out more of those and maybe do some more ambitious projects than just short videos. And I'm hoping this is something that Jake and I can really sink ourselves into. But part of the reason is the very subject that we're talking about here, about delivering the message. How do we do it? Like I said, it is great to have somebody like a Murray Porter who's willing to put to song some of these really compelling issues. And of course, talking about it is the conversation's the thing. And I say that because at some point, if you hear a song about something, if you read a book about something, if you don't discuss it, if you take something on a written page or a conversation on the radio, and if you're not willing to have a conversation about it, even if that conversation has to start out with, "I'm not sure I agree with what I heard," that's fine. One of the things that you and I both say this all the time, Matt, is if you hear something on this show that you think conflicts not only with your belief system, but with what you've heard before, then by all means check it out. I mean, we should be questioning things. We should be applying, and we've talked about it, critical thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, we should question things anyway. And unfortunately, the problem with belief systems that become a tradition is they become unquestionable. In fact, you become you can actually be scolded or scorned for daring to ask a question about certain things. And we see that in longhouse issues. And of course, churches have experiences, governments. I mean, the most tyrannical of governments are the ones who forbid you to question their authority and how they're wielding that authority. Yeah, I mean, the idea of censorship, yeah. And I'm saying, just make sense. Look, I am not promoting, anarchy or chaos. I'm just saying, let some things make sense. And perhaps even something that has become a part of your belief system may have been altered because of assimilation, indoctrination, outside exterior pressures, or simply lost in translation. Getting back to the topic we talked about, this idea of somebody having lived all their days. At some point, interpreting that in a way to mean that our lives have been predetermined, the length of our lives have been predetermined and all that. I mean, to me, that's a misinterpretation. And if you think about it logically, then perhaps it'll make you question. So when you hear somebody, especially somebody who is speaking from a position of authority or knowledge or, even, as a spiritual leader or whatever else, ask them that question. So are you saying that it didn't matter how my loved one died, that they were going to die this day anyway? Because I think if it's asked in a way more sensitive than the way I would ask it, maybe they would reevaluate how they've translated the expression. And I've seen this even between Dagarundage, Paul Delarone, and Jake Thomas back in the day. When Jake was doing these training sessions, he was traveling and he was teaching. And he was talking about, everything from the creation story to a variety of other things. And as he was saying in English, Paul would ask him in the language, and for those of us who didn't understand, didn't know what he was asking, and then Jake would come back and explain. He says, this young man, of course, Dago was quite a bit younger than Jake. This young man brought up a good point, and then he would go back and reevaluate, re-explain, and explain it, translate what he had just said differently. Now, I'm not saying this was, Paul was being pretty sensitive, but, as tough a guy as he is, he was sensitive to the knowledge that somebody like Jake Thomas had, but also sensitive to the his knowledge being more founded in the language than in English. So understanding that things could be, misinterpreted. And for many of the people that we look to today for guidance on issues of culture and ceremony and everything else, many of these guys, their first language isn't native language. It isn't Seneca or Mohawk or it is they are learning the language. So they aren't just interpreting a concept that they fully embraced from the culture and from the language into English. They've actually had translations go back and forth. So now you double the likelihood of a misinterpretation.
The language has actually changed now because it's been taught to mean something else.
Exactly. And so, look, I understand that there are a lot of issues that need to be confronted, and they really do need to be confronted. I think the more we perpetuate a falsehood, the more damage it does to us. And when we talk about things like cognitive dissonance, and especially among Native people, the problem is we are bearing the weight of that tension that's caused by the conflict from what our history is, what some of that foundation, what we do know, and the pieces that we do know, and the disconnect for the way that we either are forced to live or chosen to live, or all of that, put it that way. So there is that tension. And I think that's why we have, and of course it challenges everything from identity, to how we pursue education. And I think that tension is why we lead in some of the lists like suicide and, unemployment and depression and
social issues.
Every social issue, suicide, substance abuse, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think, when we talk about the opiate problem, we're still talking about the, the result of a conflict. Why does somebody choose? When you've not just the first time you shoot up or you decide to chew up your prescription in half the time that it was recommended or whatever the case may be. But if you're choosing to indulge in medication for euphoria, not just for pain relief, but to feel good, why? See, if you're not addressing that why, and this is where Ed always gets back to, he's alcoholism isn't the problem; it's a symptom of a problem. Well, the same thing can be for all that stuff. Look, the fact that we have domestic violence issues, where did those tensions come from? And if we're not prepared to address everything from the identity crises that we're all faced with, coming out of this December. Or from November through December. The whole special month that we get, and happy little pilgrims and happy little Indians that didn't happen. The birth of baby Jesus and and his dad Santa Claus or whatever I'm losing in translation there. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's my sarcasm coming back in. But look, we are inundated with stuff that challenges our identity. And and of course we're inundated in the outside media. Look, we don't get a whole lot of our issues in front of in front of the network news, but let the president of the United States call Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas in his sarcastic tone, and all of a sudden a native issue, which isn't really even a native issue, is in the is national news for a freaking week. Well, how about we start with telling the real Pocahontas story, and how she was kidnapped and raped and and essentially put to an early death because of her exposure to to European and European diseases. I mean, nobody wants to have that conversation. We're just gonna rather some will honor the name Pocahontas and condemn Donald Trump's use of the name. I mean, it's the whole point gets missed.
I want to bring something up.
Go ahead.
Okay, this past week or weekend, we had a fairly good discussion on Facebook on one of our friends' posts. I don't want to say his name without permission. I don't have his permission. But anyway, there was a lot of input on that, and that was a lot to do with beliefs and understanding, because there are some really good comments on there. I was very glad to see that. And that's what we need. We need more of that. We need more of that discussion between each side. And it was fairly decent. There wasn't no name calling or anything in there, but there was a few jabs here and there. But it was, for the most part, it was a good discussion. And I think we have to have a organized meeting between all of the sides of people come together, because my friend is Tuscarora, and they're looking at how to become fully functional in the Confederacy. Now, a non-functional Confederacy. But still.
Yeah, no, I get it. I know.
But still,
I know. Yeah.
Why isn't it functional?
Yeah.
That's what it's going to take. And it was a good healing thing, I think, because it really brought some issues forward. And, like you said, you bring up these things that, make people, it doesn't make sense. So if we can come together and have it make sense for everybody, that's what it's going to take. But, there was some change of position on there somewhat, but,
No, and it was a good discussion. And, and again, without getting, chewing it up here on the show specifically, part of the debate had to do with, again, the separation in ideology between the Code of Handsome Lake, Gariwio, and the Guyana de Goa. Well, but it starts there. But part of it, one of the questions was, if you don't believe in, and let's face it, I mean, the Code of Handsome Lake isn't just a behavioral code. It has been treated as a religion. So if you don't partake in the religion that is the Code of Handsome Lake in Gariwio, are you excluded from the Confederacy? And that was essentially is it a requirement to be considered Haudenosaunee to adopt that belief? Mm-hmm. And you're right. There was some great discussion. There was also some terrible comments.
Well, you're going to get that.
But
you're going to have both sides of the spectrum. But.
Well, but the problem is when somebody says something like, and I'm sorry, but if somebody makes a statement that is just absurd and categorically wrong by any sense of evaluating a statement. If somebody makes a comment and nobody confronts it, then that still stays there. And that's the problem with not just with a Facebook conversation, but even when we have and your suggestion about having an organized meeting to have such a thing, it is very, very difficult to do that, because there isn't enough of there's nobody who has retained enough respect to come in and speak with authority of knowledge. And I don't mean authority bestowed on them by others, but having a strong enough knowledge base to say, look, this is
Let me tell you
this
something.
is the way it is.
In that conversation, I've seen a lot of people that had a lot of information and knowledge in what they were talking about, and it made sense. They had references and everything else. So the answer is there. It's a matter of bringing them all together and everybody adding in their perspective in that. And if it's going to make sense, it's going to make sense. If not, it's not going to make sense. It'll find its way to find the proper middle ground, I guess. But we still have to modernize this whole system, even if it's just a roundtable discussion. It doesn't have to be the full clan, the full structure of that. Like you said before, we have to use the process to find a process.
But again, the process starts small, and again, you had we've talked about this idea of virtual meetings and that kind of stuff, which is the way people can meet without necessarily traveling. But one of the things that that was offered back to you is it's got to start local, and I agree.
Yeah.
Part of what I think is so important, even with what we do here, is that somebody has the conversation with the person next to them. At the next breakfast table, the next lunch table, the next coffee shop, and have those conversations. Because I think if somebody who they speaks to somebody they can trust and say, I heard something the other night, and while I didn't agree with it, it really made me kind of think. Now, if you can begin a conversation, so you don't have, John Kane's bluster, or Matt Hill's sense of humor, or whatever. I mean, if we can encourage people to have those conversations almost without us, even though they may have, some of that conversation may be sparked by a conversation we have. And I guess that's part of what my approach is to provide the fodder for a future conversation. And look, nobody's got to quote me on it. Nobody's got to credit or blame me for the view that that I express.
If we have these people who are educated and somewhat scholars of history and different renditions of different perspectives on that kind of stuff, if everybody comes together and they say, this is kind of what we've come up with, and then break the discussion off of that. I mean, that's almost like presenting the issue in a well. We don't even know what the issue is to put in a well. Yeah. So if they come up with that perspective and then go back to the people, because that's where we got to come up with the question first, because we're all scattered all around right now.
Well, I mean, and again, there were like 3 conversations that had different, the 3 posts that I saw that had similar conversations in it, and one, somebody had posted something along the lines, and they'd asked, and again, John Mohawk, and they'd asked John Mohawk, why is it that our culture has survived? Why is it that even with some of what that hasn't survived, like, how is it that we've been able to persevere and still maintain ourselves? And speaking specifically, Haudenosaunee, and he said that John Mohawk said Handsome Lake. That's what he said John Mohawk's answer was. And I mean, he didn't offer any other explanation. He just said Handsome Lake is the reason today that we still have some semblance of our culture. And
I'll agree with that to a point.
Well, and I don't. I mean, I don't know how we could talk about a culture that developed for thousands of years. That somehow the only reason it exists is because of an aberration of that culture. That would be that's a couple of hundred years old.
That goes back to, you have to understand where we came from to get to where we are today. And at the time that was going on, there was a lot of drunk people, and there was a lot of
we still have a lot of drunk people. So yeah. So my response to that is, again, people can believe what they want to believe about Handsome Lake's visions and about the code of Handsome Lake that comes from it. But there's 2 things that were clear and strong pillars of Handsome Lake's view. One of them was witchcraft. Mm-hmm. He was a witch hunter. Mm-hmm. He believed that witchcraft was so responsible for so much of what was going on in our territories, that rooting out witchcraft, including the execution of witches, to the point that even Red Jacket was put on trial for witchcraft by Handsome Lake and Corn Planter. So one of the pillars of his belief system was rooting out witchcraft, which didn't exist, doesn't exist. It's not real. but even if you believe that it does, and the other was drinking. Now, so one is rooting out something that didn't exist, and one was rooting out something that we haven't rooted out yet. So to suggest that with those 2 strong pillars of his teachings, that somehow the fact that we still have as much of our ceremonies intact can be accredited to him, again, this is one of these areas.
That's just my understanding of it. He at least got people back into the Longhouse for the ceremonies. I mean, even like I heard stories before too about that the church was so dominant that Longhouse ceremonies were prohibited, or everybody was shunned or put down because of that, and people had to do it in homes, in small homes, but that they were still outside watching. That's a story that they talk about.
That's from Ganawanga, yeah.
You can see the glowing
cigarette
lights
in
the woods, and that was the parents watching the kids going into Longhouse.
Yeah, but again, that had nothing to do with Handsome Lake. That was Ganawanga.
But still, I mean, there's still there to that point where the ceremonies were looked down upon by the Christians, or by church, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know if they're all Christian, but they're still church. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. Look, we're just about out of time. Look, I mean, and so again, even as this conversation closes, I mean, you can hear the tension that not between Matt and I, but the tension over some of the subject matter. But see, this is the reason we have to have a better understanding, and I'm hoping these conversations can take place within the home, and then within the community, and then maybe someday we do have that. I mean, these great law recitals aren't getting it done. That's
a story of the peacemaker.
Well, it is so far from being what it needs to be that it's actually kind of a distraction as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not saying don't go, but if you believe that you could go to one of these things and then walk away with a fix, to how our
create a college course, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look. So again, we know what the message is.
Be a great lawyer degree.
And I'm not sure what the message delivery system is. So as we go into this new year, this 2018, we're going to continue to try delivering the message through song, through humor, through written material, through diplomacy, and in some cases, lack of diplomacy. I'm not going to tell you which one I'm claiming.
You're not going to leave that out.
Yeah. No, but I think some of the stuff does have to be confronted like a wall, and perhaps some of it has to be confronted like a fluffy bunny. I don't know, but we'll see. Look, I want to thank you guys all for listening. I want to thank you for always listening. I mean, there's so many of you that support what we do here, and I appreciate it. But spread the word. Spread the word, and understand that when you spread the word, there are some people who are going to hear something, and it might take 3, 4, 5 tries to say, yeah, I guess I can agree with some of that. But and that's I think that's what we're shooting for. We're shooting for you to listen to something here, take what you want of it or what you can of it, and then have more of a conversation later. That's all we can suggest.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, I want to thank you for coming in. This is a conversation that you and I have talked about having here. So, and we'll continue to have it. So, again, thank you for listening.
We need a conference.
Yeah, we do.
Let's have a conference.
All right, we'll be back on Friday. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you. Yahweh.
She gave me the world, and the universe agreed. She gave me a heart, that's all that I need. She was my best friend, but I couldn't see